in and wonderful misty mornings of boats. But I digress slightly. I would then pop into the office to do the travel broadcast. Southampton Romance was closed down and moved on. So I was then shunted into the Winchester Romance office, which is very exciting. I swapped medieval Southampton for medieval Winchester, and worked there for several years via the Mayflower Theatre. And of course, since February, I've been in my utility room. You can do a travel bulletin pretty much anywhere. What do you need to create it? Obviously, information, broadcast equipment, and a clock. Not a lot, really. And you know, in 20 years, it really hasn't changed. 20 years ago, though, the most important piece of technology for gathering information was the phone. We had the travel hotline, still have the travel hotline, but 20 years ago, it was the main information gathering tool. And callers would call often with the first hint of trouble, and then if I was very lucky, they would keep me updated on how things were. Got a bit hairy if we had several big incidents, because it was very difficult to spend 15 minutes trying to find out what was happening, making sure the information was correct, and then putting it into a nice neat bulletin and sending it on to people on there. And sometimes callers were a little bit tricky. For example, the phone would ring and it would be Jim from Lymington. Jim, Lymington, I would type in. Always type it in. I'm on the M3. Oh, okay, cross out Lymington, we're on the M3. I'm on my way to London. Do you know where you've got to, Jim? Oh, I think I might pass Winchester. So then there's a bit of a discussion about past Winchester services. Where might you be? Anyway, the road was closed northbound on the M3. Big trouble. Phone would ring again. Hello, Judy. It's Charles from Lymington. Hello, Charles. Oh, from Lymington still, but he was obviously following or coming back home because he was on the M3 coming southbound. Big accident. M3 completely closed. Southbound. Oh, no, really? What I've discovered very quickly is most people call when they're travelling on the opposite carriageway to tell you of an incident, but they forget to tell you that they're going the other way. So I did learn very quickly to say, I do hope it hasn't held you up for long. And they would say, no, I'm going the other way. But that would be the only time that they would tell me. Sometimes they didn't even know what road they were going on. I always remember Margaret from Gosport ringing, Judy, there's been a terrible accident going to Portsmouth. Oh, Margaret, where are you travelling from? Gosport. Which road are you on? I don't know. People get very upset, and you can understand it if you've seen or been involved in an accident. So it then takes a big process of elimination to work out if we're on the motorway, the big road, lots and lots of lanes, or maybe the A27 and not the M27. And then also I'd have to phone around for updates from the police, for the trains, for the ferries, for the planes. It was very, very hectic and busy. Now, yeah, we have got the internet. Whoa! Nearly all my information now is found online. It is a bit like being a detective. That first hint of problem now, unless somebody's actually seen an accident in front of them, they tend not to call now. So the first hint might be a slowdown on TomTom or Google Maps or on Highways Agency. They all show slightly different information, so I have to compare them all. It all needs cross-referencing with another map. With the roadwork information, is it an accident or is it some roadworks I don't know about? Or maybe somebody else is mentioning it on another website or in tweets. And also I can check a lot of webcams. Unfortunately, often they're pointing at the road up a tree or into the sky, but a lot of them are there now. Not many in Dorset, but Hampshire has a lot. And I also use things like the red funnel webcam to see the boats going across the Sonad. So what's changed in my 15 minutes between the bulletins in 20 years is probably that whereas before I would be talking to people, now I'm frantically scurrying around on the internet trying to find out what's going on. My broadcast equipment, you know, it hasn't changed at all in 20 years. I need broadband, obviously. I suppose the big change was that to have ADSL, the better quality broadband, 20 years ago, you had to ask for it. But now, of course, you get it anyway. So the ADSL line is there. I've got a microphone so that I can talk to you. And I have headphones so that I can hear the show. One of the problems I always have is that I actually am not in constant contact with the show. They can't hear me. If I need to talk to them, I have to ring them up and say, help, we've got a big accident, the M3's closed, we really need to start talking about this more. And I have a unit to take sound to the studio and also bring the sound to my headphones. It's very portable, I can take it anywhere, so I have for 20 years. Oh, and you know the most important thing for us all at work tends to be the clock. Precise timing is vital. I know that you would be pretty stoked if I suddenly started wittering on 8 o'clock and you were expecting the news and you'd expected me at 2 minutes to. Although a bulletin is usually only 40 seconds. So that's another challenge, trying to get encapsulated what you really need into 40 seconds. On a really hectic morning, I might have to ring the show and say, guys, I really need a minute and a half. But that's the sort of thing that we're working for. So coming before the news, it's important that my bulletin doesn't make them late. And of course, the other thing about my bulletin is it does go out into cars on the traffic management system, so that you do hear that you can pick it up, it can interrupt your broadcasting. In fact, a gentleman, when I first started, rang me to say, is what you're doing legal? I wasn't sure what he meant. Every time I'm listening to my favourite music, I get you silly woman, I don't want you. I did tell him he could turn me off. He was a bit surprised. And I also use script writing software. I always write it down because in the excitement, it's very easy to say the wrong way. I have got very good on my east and my west and my north and my south and my lefts and my rights, but I do need to just make sure it's written down. And also the software is clever. It gives you a rough indication of how long it might take you to read out the text. What's going to happen in the future? Do you know, I don't think you're going to need me, because you've got your phone and your bits and bobs that tell you, your sat nav said, oh, you need to leave 20 minutes earlier today. The one time mine did tell me probably that I needed to leave 2 hours earlier because the motorway was closed. I didn't hear it 2 hours early, so I did think, well, that doesn't work. But of course, it's getting better and better. Large incidents you might want constant updates for. And again, if you're in the shower, you might rather have your radio on than actually to check on your phone whether there's a problem. So for a while, I think we'll be around, but I don't think we'll be around for long. I think I've been extremely lucky to work during a period where it's been so needed. And we will take questions towards the end. So as long as I do everything correctly now, I am going to pass you across to, I think I've done it wrong already, my co-presenter, Richard, so that he can tell you about other aspects of radio silence.
Got it. Thank you very much, Judy. That's very kind. Now, Judy, I've been working with for 14 years at BBC Radio Centre, which is absolutely crazy to think that I've been there that long. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with Judy. And what I'm going to do is show you today a few things from my radio past, because whilst Judy is a travel presenter and producer, I'm classed as a multimedia producer presenter. So I work across a variety of different programs, speech-based programs, music programs, a kind of combination of the two. So some with news, some purely fun and entertainment and music. And really, it's the variety of the job that's appealed to me since I started out in radio in the late 90s while I was still at school. My original journey into the industry was at hospital radio down in Plymouth in the West Country, Hospital Radio Plymouth, where great people like Philip Schofield actually started out many years, I must hasten to add, before me. And it was a great service, and it still is a great service. There are lots of hospital radios still around at most major hospitals in the country, where you'd go in, you'd roam the wards, you'd pick up requests from people that were ill in hospital and wanted a bit of escapism, and then you'd go down to the studios and you'd physically flick through all of the vinyl that was on the shelves and all the CDs were there, and hope that none of them were scratched and that they would play correctly, and then you'd read out their dedication on the microphone in the studio on your program, and then physically play that bit of vinyl and that CD. And it was great fun. I did that for a few years, and then we did a few things called restricted service licenses, which is where you'd get permission to have a small FM broadcasting license for somewhere like a city. So we did quite a few of those in Plymouth. And then I got a job at the local commercial radio station down there called Plymouth Sound, which was a fantastic place to work. It was the station that I grew up listening to, and it was a station that at one point had 65% of the people in the city listening. Now, these days, if you're looking at audience statistics for most local radio stations, you'd be lucky if most of them got 10%, to be completely honest, because there are so many more radio stations now. But that commercial radio station, Plymouth Sound, got 65% in its heyday. And it was ridiculous, because you used to go in to do programs and the phones were always ringing. You'd have usually about 10 lines coming into each studio. And I can remember just going in and every single one of those lines was ringing. It was unusual if there weren't people ringing the radio station, because it was so popular and it was so well listened to and so needed and kind of cherished by the people that were in the area. I had a very naughty colleague who used to do the evening programs, and he actually used to get so fed up with constantly picking up the phone with people constantly ringing that he would put a vinyl cover, an LP record cover or a CD cover over the phone so you could ignore the flashing light. And he kept doing this. Then one night he had a knock at the front door of the radio station. It was actually the police, and they just said, well, excuse me, is everything all right? We've got all these people calling up the police station because they can't get through to your radio station. They can't get through to Plymouth Sound. They really want to hear a request. Is everything okay there, sir? So there really was absolutely no escape. It was an incredibly popular service. And what I wanted to start by doing is to play you a video that I've got of one of the original commercial radio stations, Capital Radio, which is still going now, but it's by no means the same as it was back in the early days. This is a video from the early 1980s, and this shows how they operated, and have a look at the equipment and the technology that they've got in the studio that they were using. Look at they're called cart machines. There's vinyl turntables there as well. There is absolutely nothing computerized about it whatsoever. And the other reason why I picked this particular video is because I thought it'd be good to watch after Judy's wonderful presentation, where she's talking about all the modern equipment that she's been using the past 20 or so years. And when you look at how they did the travel news back then, it's absolutely crazy to see how different it is. So let's have a look at that video. I'll get it up here. It's about 5-6 minutes long.
Hello, I've come to see Graham Dean on the breakfast show.
Fine. Your name is?
Dawn Lodge from 73.
Okay, then if you'd like to sign in for us.
Yeah, sure.
Harry, JR.
Pleased to meet you, JR.
Here's our pilot.
Are you all right? Not too bad.
Jolly good.
What sort of plane is this, Brian?
It's a PA-34 Seneca. If you'd like to put your seat belt
Sure,
on, I think
most
you're gonna
important.
Need it. Yeah. All right, all set? Good, that's it.
That's it, I'm in.
Okay. All locked in. Good.
It's a cloudy old morning in London town. Showers on the way as well. Oh dear, it's getting worse. Top temperature today about 8 centigrade, 46 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's currently 4 centigrade in town at the moment. Right, album track. This is Musical Youth.
Hello?
Hello there. You must be Dawn.
Yeah, you're
Hello,
Graham.
Dawn. Pleased to meet you. Come and sit down here.
Oh, thanks a lot.
I'm awfully sorry. It's very cramped in here, so it's a good job we're both small.
Thank you.
And we've got a little seat for you. I've chucked the producer out. He's getting the tea, so we'll have tea in a moment. Welcome to Capital.
Thank you. My mate Harry's up with your mate, Brian Wolf, in the Flying Eye.
Oh, Harry, yes, he's up in the plane now. And
Yeah.
that's a good timing, actually, because we're going over to Brian. He's spotting all the jams in just a moment.
Oh, good.
Hey, Brian, is that the NatWest Tower over there?
Yeah, it looks pretty odd, doesn't it, from this
Doesn't it?
angle?
Yeah, I was going to say, looking down on it rather than up.
Yeah, it's very big.
Yeah, I'll say. Some pools over there I can see.
Yeah, St Paul's, and you've got all the city underneath you, the Barbican, and then just further along you see Westminster. It really is all out rather like a map. It's an incredible sight, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say. It's not like this in any ordinary plane, is it?
That's right.
This is the first time I've ever flown before, too.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
You're very brave.
I thought there was going to be a couple of record players, but there's a lot more stuff. What is it all? Is it very simple?
It is simple. It has to be with people like us, you know, because
Yeah.
we're a bit slow on the pickup. So we have, well, in fact, we have 3 turntables in here. You're sitting where the third one usually is, but we had to
Oh.
get rid of that, you see.
Oh,
No, don't
right.
go, because we don't need it.
Oh.
So that's 1 Graham record player, which is playing the record you're listening to at the moment, Musical Youth. Then we have the cartridge machine over here, which plays all the jingles, including the Flying Eye jingle, with the hooser and everything, and that'll hail Brian Wolf.
Right. Have I got to be quiet now?
Be quiet,
Okay.
don't join in. Here we go, right. So there we are, that's Heartbreaker from Musical Youth from their latest LP, and their first as well. Really good track that. I think that would make a very good single. Right, it's time to see what's happening with London's traffic. Courtesy of Brian Wolf and the Flying Eye. Good morning, Brian. How are you doing up there?
Good morning, Graham. Not a bad day at all. A little bit bumpy up here, but the weather seems to be clearing quite nicely. There's quite a wind, and I think we've got showers coming in. As far as the traffic is concerned, the two bridges to watch out for now are Tower Bridge northbound and Vauxhall Bridge. They're very slow moving indeed. The rest of the bridges seem to be fairly clear. And Victoria, from Victoria up to Park Lane is fairly solid. Also, if you're coming south, the Edgware Road, not too good at all. Oh, by the way, Graham, I understand that you've got a guest down there in the studio with you, just as I've got Harry here with me.
Can I make a dedication?
Yeah, go on.
All right, I'd like to make a dedication for Dawn, for Ethel, and for Alec, and everyone that knows me.
Great.
Harold.
Were there any problems to begin with?
Oh yes, certainly in the first week. I mean, the biggest problem was I didn't know where we were. so I'll never forget it. In the first week, we were told there was a big traffic jam in Lower Road, Rotherhithe, and that's parallel to the Old Kent Road, you see.
Yeah.
So we went sailing up the Old Kent Road, and there was no traffic on it. And I was glibly saying, no, there's no problem at all, And there was this huge jam right next to it, which we didn't see. And I got irate phone calls and letters and the whole lot. After that, we took the police up with us for a few months, who were very helpful. And then over a period of time, I learned the whole thing myself.
Right, good morning to you. It's 12 minutes past 8, time for our second report. From Brian Wolf in the Flying Eye. How's the traffic looking now, Brian?
Yes, Graham, well, there's not really much change. That A406 on the North Circular Road, those roadworks, they're still being a pest, I'm afraid. There's still about a...
So there's a good example of what broadcasting used to be like when you were reliant on lots of analog sources. There's nothing digital there whatsoever. You've got the turntables playing the music out off of vinyl. You've got the cart machines, which were those kind of square cartridges that he was putting into the cart machines in front of him, in front of the studio desk, which just had a bit of magnetic traditional audio tape in that would go round and round, which is why they were used quite often for jingles. And the link up to the helicopter as well, but the little plane was completely analog as well. There's nothing digital used whatsoever. It all changed in radio when there was a massive difference when computers were brought in and everything went to computer playout. And that was a time that is seen as quite contentious because a lot of people have had their jobs and a lot of roles have been replaced when computer playout was brought in. So if you ask some people that own big commercial radio groups, they probably think that bringing computers in was absolutely fantastic because it meant it was cheaper to operate. It meant it was much more simple than managing lots of different people with all these different wild and wonderful personalities. But if you ask a lot of people in radio, that's when a lot of the jobs disappeared because computers were replacing a lot of the workforce. However, there was this golden time as well where people were still being employed and computers were being used hand in hand. And I want to play you a short video now from Tomorrow's World, which shows you the introduction of something called networking, which was used in local radio to great effect and is used tremendously now with things like the Heart Network, the Capital Network in the commercial sector. The BBC uses it to a degree in BBC local radio, where you can present one program, but when you're presenting it from the network center, you can push a button and it plays a different bit of output, a different jingle at every different local radio station. So it almost pretends that it's a local radio program, even though it isn't. This is a great little video. This was one is from, as I say, Tomorrow's World from the early 90s. And this is when that system really took hold here in the UK. Have a look at this.
Weather has finally blown itself away. It's going to be bright and sunny across most of the country. Top temperatures
The trouble with national radio is that the information you get isn't always specific enough.
Travel news. The tailbacks on the M6 have cleared and all traffic is now moving freely on motorways.
And it's not just the weather reports that can miss you out. But having separate local radio stations to serve small areas is obviously an expensive operation, unless you run things like they do in the West Country.
Where a company in charge of commercial stations in Bristol, Reading, Bournemouth and Swindon has started controlling them all from one location while still keeping the information local. Oh, excuse me a moment.
Yeah, even in the depths of winter, you're going to go reaching for your surfboards with this one.
Music played at the control centre in Bristol is sent down broadcast quality telephone lines to the 4 unmanned stations on the network. Now everybody hears the music and there's nothing new in that, but listen to what happens when I come to play a station ident.
The sensational sound there of the Beach Boys and good vibrations.
Brunel Classic Gold.
Down in Bournemouth, I wouldn't hear any mention of that Bristol station. I'd get the Bournemouth ident.
Yeah, the sensational sound of the Beach Boys there and good vibrations.
Classic Gold Radio to see our classic gold.
While over in Reading, I'd also hear my own station announcement at the same time.
So while listeners can tune into the same music, they get their own local jingles. It's possible to do this because all the unmanned stations are linked by a network of data lines to this control centre. Each station houses a computer on which local information, like those jingles, is stored. So at the push of a button here, I can trigger each computer to transmit its own local messages. I can also update the information for each station. For instance, this evening I phoned up the weather centre and then recorded separate local forecasts onto the computers for Bournemouth and Reading. So when it's time for a weather flash, every area gets its own.
Here's what my local computer is transmitting.
Severe gales affecting the south coast, making it a stormy night in Bournemouth.
Judith.
And mine?
Things should stay dry in the Reading area, but quite chilly.
Good. Howard.
So with this system, local news about the weather, travel, competition results and even jumble sales in each town is actually controlled from the network centre. And from Bristol to Bournemouth, listeners need never know that they're sharing the same fab DJ. Now here's Judith.
So there you are. That's an example of the networking that became commonplace in particularly commercial radio, where a lot of groups and a lot of network centres used computing to pretend that they had local radio programs while still having a national presenter, so they could save on a lot of costs, roll that out. A lot of people are very critical of that kind of technology and the way it's being used, but the market was going that way as well. And nowadays, of course, we've got these big commercial networks in the commercial area and arena, places like Heart FM, Capital FM, Greatest Hits, Hits Radio. They all use the same kind of thing. And indeed, BBC Local Radio now uses computer playout as well. So while I was at Plymouth Sound, a job came up at the local BBC station, BBC Radio Devon, and I got a job there answering the phones and making the tea. I managed to make my way in. I then got a job news reading when a colleague accidentally referred to someone as a Kurdish turd instead of a Turkish Kurd in a news bulletin, and then just burst into laughter. And she left the corporation shortly after that, and I took on the role of a newsreader for several years. And then gradually I started to present programs there, started to do speech programs, things like drive time afternoons, and then I did the breakfast show for a year. And then after working at Radio Devon for a year, I went to go and work at Radio Jersey for a year doing breakfast there. And then I came back to the UK and I eventually got a job at BBC Radio Solent, which is where I've been the multimedia producer and presenter for 14 years. And it's been good fun. And it's been interesting to see how the technology has changed on the BBC side as well. As I say, they now have computerized playout at BBC local radio stations. It's a system called Bylaw, which is a virtual local radio setup where you have the software in the studio, the hardware, the actual studio equipment is there for you to fade the songs up, press play, they play, but the servers where they are in other parts of the country. They've got 2 servers for the 2 different studios. There's one in central London and one at another secret location, and that is where all the audio is stored. So everything is done virtually. There is nothing in the studio unless something goes wrong and you have to take control locally and have to play a CD for some strange reason. Everything is done down the line digitally from these virtual server rooms, which is great when it works. And of course, this opens up plenty of other opportunities for loads of other guys as well, including guys in community radio. And earlier this year, I did a presentation for, well, it was a documentary, I suppose I would give it its proper title, for the BBC News Channel, a half-hour programme where I travelled around the UK and I spoke to guys about what makes proper local radio and how local radio works when it works well. And everyone said the same thing. It's got to be local if you're doing local radio. But the problem now is, how do you do this whilst being able to make a profit or being able to sustain your business with the costs that are involved? Well, the great thing is technology has helped reduce the costs. And I spoke to quite a few people in community radio, and my friends here, Duncan and Dan, who operate their own commercial radio station called Goldmine, which is available on several DAB transmitters across the whole of the UK, and they run it from their shed. And it's absolutely fantastic because they do live breakfast show every day, and then the rest of the time they do automated programs or programs with presenters in other parts of the UK that dial in virtually and then present their program on their network for them. And it keeps costs down because they don't need the number of staff, they don't need the amount of equipment that traditionally you would need. So here's a little video from that documentary I made for the BBC News Channel earlier in March of this year, just before the outbreak hit. And have a look at this, because it tells the story of Goldmine, but it also shows you what's going on at a couple of community radio stations around the UK as well. And the voiceover, by the way, at the beginning, there's a little voiceover. It does repeat itself. We're not sure why, but when we compress the file to put it on here, it does come round twice. So don't think you're going mad.
The great changes in radio in the last 5 or 10 years is the democratization of it. Anybody can run a radio station now.
It was an incredible launch because it was the first time commercial radio had ever come across the Tamar Bridge, of course.
And after decades working for both commercial and BBC Radio in Cornwall, Duncan Warren has launched his own DAB station with his son.
We've invested heavily in technology at the start, so we don't need a staff of thousands to help run the station.
56% of people in Cornwall now are listening on DAB. We have now become the main listening force.
As we grow, our output will grow.
And after decades working for both commercial and BBC Radio in Cornwall, Duncan Warren
in the rugby final in the Bill Beaumont Cup. We took a coachload of our listeners up there with us. That is something that we can do. National radio can't do that. That is one advantage we have got over national radio. They cannot do that. We can.
This radio station is for people who work on sites, builders, tradesmen, painters, decorators, who have the radio on all day. And they have a much higher time spent listening than people who work in offices, which is why the building and the trades as a profession is the only profession that has a specific radio made for them. They make radios that are for sites, the site radio.
This is Voice FM.
We've probably got 300 community radio stations dotted around the country, and the plan is for even more of those to appear.
I think with community radio, it's very much a different ball game to an ILR station because you're more or less reliant completely on volunteers.
We focus on what's going on around us. Of course, we talk about what's going on around the country and pop culture, but we have a lot of guests that are trying to raise awareness for issues around the community, local artists, and I think that makes it very special.
Voice FM is fantastic because you look at the board behind us I'm looking at now, there's just so many varied shows. There's a business show, there's a football show, there's our show, lots of different people coming together, really varied.
As you can probably tell, I have an accent. I'm from Portugal originally. I was really insecure and I said, I'm really self-conscious about my accent. Can I actually speak on air? And the person that was there with me was like, oh, absolutely, that makes you unique. That's incredible. Voice gave me the opportunity to kind of grow and be more confident about myself, which I'm really grateful for.
Oh, of course it matters. It's about bringing a community together, bringing the small names and the small voices out. That's what it's about.
The problem with some community radio is that it's restricted in its funding.
We need to be de-restricted, firstly. We need, if we're really not going to have any local radio other than community radio, we need to be de-restricted.
If we could just go out there and earn our money and compete with the big boys on the same terms, then we would not only give them a run for their money, but we would provide an even bigger and better service for this area.
I see
any advertising money that we bring in as helping to support the local economy.
Setting up and running Black Cat Radio, which I do with a team of directors, is probably the hardest thing I've ever done.
I believe community radio is the new local commercial radio.
The local stations sold out to the big boys. The big boys are in it to make money. We're in it to make programmes, which is exactly where we started off back in the 70s.
Radio is dead, long live radio. 90% of people are still consuming radio in its various forms at the moment.
Hopefully radio will always have its place in people's lives. It's a magic medium. I still think it's magic.
Local radio is hugely important. It must never be allowed to die.
And there we are. That's a summary of some of the community radio stations that are using technology at the moment to be able to broadcast, and doing so very successfully, and also some of the little commercial radio stations as well, like the one there, Goldmine, run by Duncan and Dan. That's pretty much the end of my presentation. I could talk to you more about where the future's going, but to be honest, I don't think anyone's quite sure, but technology is definitely a part of it. I hope you enjoyed that. If you'd like to find out more about what I do or reach out, I'm on Twitter. Best place to follow me is at Richard Latto on there. Thank you very much for listening. I shall now hand you over to Margaret.
Hi. This is, if you like to come and join, Judy as well. So what we've actually got is the end of this one. So far, no questions have come through on the chat or questions, but if people would like to raise their hands, but certainly what I'd like to do is just ask a quick question to both of you. We're coming back into lockdown. How do you think that local radio can help?
Richard, you start.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think BBC local radio generally has a really, really key part to play in lockdown. There's only so much that you can get off of social media and off of your phone. You can get the news, but you can't get the companionship, and you can't get the real relatable human beings. And that is where local radio is at its best. It's when it's someone there that you can trust as a friend. I had someone that tweeted only yesterday and said, I listen to X, Y, Z and Richard Latto, and they've listed a few other people on the radio in various places, and they said I listen to them because they don't know me, but I consider them to be friends. And I think that is what local radio is like when it is done well. And I think having this lockdown for the second time, it is crucial that local radio is there, being as local as it can possibly be. The first time the lockdown happened, I can remember on the Saturday, I do a Saturday show between 6 and 8. I stayed on to help one of my colleagues, David, who does the late show at 10 o'clock. And we were still there at 2 in the morning, giving out the phone number for the Samaritans to people that were ringing in, that were really scared, that were really lonely, that were really vulnerable. Now, they're not going to ring up whoever runs Twitter and ask them for advice or companionship, but they are going to ring their local radio station because they consider them to be a relatable person. The number of events, and Judy's too modest to say this, but the number of events I go to for the radio station and people ask, where's Judy, or where's Jeff, or where's Fred, or where's Julia, or where's whoever. You don't get that in any other media, but you probably wouldn't even get that in television. It doesn't even have that personal connection that radio does. I think that's probably fair to say, Judy.
Yes, it is. And even on the hotline, just yesterday, I took a call and it was an elderly lady with a very strong accent. I could barely understand her, in tears. And it was something to do with her pension. A couple of times I said, this is a travel hotline. But you sound nice, she said, and I need help. So in the end, the only thing I could think of was to refer her to Citizens Advice Bureau. So I managed to work out where she was, made sure she had a pen, made sure she put down the number properly. But it is that reaching out to people. It's so important. But I do have a funny story about people asking about you. Oh, Richard, it involves you. Bournemouth Air Show a few years ago. You were very, very, very relieved to see that I'd arrived. And I couldn't work out why. Well, we always used to go to the air show, and we have our little card display. And somebody had said to you, Richard, that it was very disrespectful to have my little postcard picture out. And what did they say to you?
I remember this so well. Someone said, why are you still putting photos of Judy Goodlett out when she died? And I said, I'm pretty sure she hasn't died because I heard her on the radio this morning. And they were adamant that you were no longer here.
So you thought I must have died in a crash coming down, and maybe we'd done it on the hotline or something.
Yeah, how did they know?
It was very funny. And people talk about the other weird thing is that, and I don't know how these conversations begin, but people talk about us. And again, at the Bournemouth Air Show one year, a very lovely gentleman came up to me who sang in a choir, and they'd all been out having a drink after their choral practice. And they decided that I was, John Arlett's daughter, the cricket commentator, and he'd just died. And they were giving me his condolences because my dad had just died. I'm not his daughter. It was very thoughtful.
It is strange that the amount of ownership I think people have over you being a broadcaster, but particularly on radio, more so than television. They feel like they really, really know you, and they either absolutely adore you or they really don't like you at all. And the number of events that I've been to where I was at one, I'm not naming names of where it was and who it was, but I was there with a whole load of colleagues, and let's say one of them was called Fred, and this lady turned up and she went around every single person and said, "Oh, hello, who are you? Oh, Richard, yes, I like you. Oh, hello, you're Jeff, yes, I like you. Fred, I hate you. Hate you." And that was the first time they'd ever met. But they had this such strong opinion, and you only get that in radio. And I think the best people are like that. The best broadcasters, whatever you're doing on the wireless, you divide people. People either love you or don't.
Yeah. Yes, and they don't mind what they say. I was found lurking outside Marks and Spencer's in Winchester for a day in my little Radio Solent t-shirt. I used to hate having to wear those. And a lady came up to me. I hadn't been on air very long. And I think perhaps at that point I was also presenting the early morning show. And she came up to me and she said, "If I hadn't met you, I would have said that you were tall, slim and elegant." And then she went very red.
Well, I think that you fit that description perfectly anyway.
That's very generous, Margaret, but it was funny.
As we at the moment haven't got any questions coming up, something I'd like to ask both of you, Judy first and then Richard. You talked about your careers, but Judy, how did you actually get in at the beginning? I mean, where did you start from? I know that was from computing. Could you come back to this?
Yes, I realise that I didn't cover that bit really. After I left your wonderful classes, which I'd started as an old fogey, doing the very first of the part-time information systems degree at Solent, very long time ago, and I was sort of turning 40. And it was a time when we just had a terrible recession, and the thought was that older folk were going to be wanted again with good qualifications because we didn't have enough younger folk once things boomed. So I decided I'd do a degree in something I didn't know much about. I'm so old, I had my my personnel development qualifications, which of course is now human resources. And I found that sort of continuing that and becoming a lecturer in adult education, it was difficult to relearn something you knew, having to change sort of tack. So I thought I'd do something I knew nothing about. So I arrived in Margaret's classes and very quickly wished it was not a decision I'd made, particularly with statistics and things. But we battled on for 4 years, Margaret, it was then, wasn't it? And it was brilliant, and it completely changed my life. And I started to, I'd always been lecturing in various things at Eastleigh, but and computer lecturing got quite a bit later, but I started my own IT company on the back of an information technology club that I ran at King Alfred's College, where I'd come to work, which became hugely successful. And life personally got a bit tricky. My mum was dying. My daughter was at 16 at an age where she needed me more. And I thought I need to not have the rigour of a normal workload. I'll start my own little IT business. And I started my own little IT business. And I didn't know you could then start a business with a fax machine and a bit of knowledge, and off you went. So it was very successful. And I then I was the first person in Yellow Pages to have a website and an email address. How exciting is that? Didn't have anybody to email. Nobody got hold of me on the email because nobody else was on email. But it was very exciting. And then the wonderful Ali Sparks, who was a producer at Radio Solent, is now a world famous children's author, was a producer, needed someone to talk computing, got in touch with me, hoped I was a woman. So I went in for a bit and ended up going for 2 years talking about computers every Friday afternoon with the wonderful Richard Cartridge, which was just magic. Of course, sadly, Richard died very recently, which was a terrible loss. And from there, I thought, oh, this is quite fun. Would I like to do this? And I said, well, would you consider me for a job? And they went, yeah, but you won't take the pay. The pay in local radio is terrible. Anybody who thinks that you're on fantastic salaries, we're not. And I was a bit shocked, but I did take the pay. And over the years, I've done various things. I've always done the travel. And I also launched an IT fact sheet one adult learning week when it was decided that Solent should do something, and we taught computers for a week. And so I put in a little fact sheet of mainly Microsoft Office stuff, beginners, medium, and advanced experienced people. And sent it out for 5 years to 12,000 people. People still come up to me and talk about it. I can't imagine that they still use them. They must be very out of date, but they still talk to me about my fact sheets. So it's just been the weirdest progression. But having that IT knowledge and background has been useful because I've always worked remotely, needed to sort myself out if I had a problem. So being able to confidently work with technology has been a great bonus, Margaret.
One of the things I think that is strong things with if you do sort of computing type courses on the technical side or the business side, you're very nicely positioned if you don't want to stick with computing to branch out in all sorts of areas. So, I mean, I think it's a fantastic sort of stepping off ground. Now, Richard, because I know that you've very much come from that background.
Yes, yeah, I did a degree called Multimedia Production Technology at Plymouth University, and I did that for two reasons. One, I got the job newsreading at the BBC, and I was keen to kind of stay and keep hold of that job, but also I always wanted to do something in computing because that was my plan, because I thought, I'll never be able to forge a career in broadcasting. It's far too cutthroat and dog eat dog, and there's not many opportunities. But yeah, I mean, it was brilliant, and it's really, really helped me, because the great thing about learning about technology is you not just learn the skills for a particular piece of software or hardware, but you learn the ability to learn new software and new hardware quickly and can adapt. And I come across so many people that make my blood boil, and I have to be so polite with them, who come in and they get a job as a broadcast journalist or a broadcast presenter, and they just go, oh, I'm not very good at the technical side of things. And all I want to say is, then go. because if you can't do it, you can't do the job. You might think you're incredibly witty and erudite on air, but if you can't operate the computer, then that is half of the job. And the same goes with journalists. If you can't edit and you are constantly asking someone else to edit your piece for you, well, that's not acceptable, because you're asking someone to do half your job. And it's so important to know the technology now, because it is everywhere. I mean, one small little story I've got for you, changing names. I can remember when I was working on one particular program in one part of the world for a local radio station, and the presenter went through a really messy divorce, and he met a lady online on one of the first internet kind of chat groups, and he said, I know what we're going to do, Richard. I've fallen madly in love with this random woman I've met for 5 minutes online. I'm going to go and move into her house, and I'm going to install an ISDN line in her spare bedroom, and I'm going to take my mixing desk and my computer with all the songs on, and I'm going to do the show down the line. But please don't tell anyone. After you've done the news, just fade me up. And he used to do that for 3 hours a day, and no one knew, because we knew the technology and we used voice over IP streaming for the first time ever. And that would have been around 2002, 2003. And it worked like a dream. And of course, now voice over IP and doing shows remotely is the dumb thing. But it's being able to push the boundaries and to learn that technology and have that faith in that technology. If you've got a fear or a phobia of technology and you're trying to get a job in broadcasting, stop, because you need to have the confidence. I always liken it to, you remember guys like Kenny Everett. I used to like Chris Morris as well. He was kind of like a Kenny Everett of the 90s, who used to know the technology so well they could manipulate audio to be incredibly funny and incredibly witty with it and do all these wonderful whiz bang effects. That's the kind of hunger that you need to get on in broadcasting now. You can't come into it and say, oh, I'm just not very good technically.
No. I did have to get, I once went for an adult learning week. I think the BBC had a nationwide project where they were encouraging people to spend an hour with an older family member, helping them perhaps get online and learn something. And so somebody had this wonderful idea that because the crossing across the Solent was an hour on a red funnel ferry, that our Jude would go off into an IT lesson on a poor unsuspecting person on the ferry early one morning. So 4:30 in the morning, I don't know why I didn't catch the fast red jet first of all, or catch the car ferry first, because I got the fast red jet over to Cowes, thinking that I would be able to get a taxi. And because it was the first time at that point anybody had tried to broadcast on a computer via Wi-Fi, I was sent with 2 backup systems that weighed a ton that I had to drag up Cowes High Street. So I thought, we'll be fine, I'll get a taxi. Not thinking that at 5 o'clock in the morning, there wasn't a taxi in the rain on Cowes High Street. So I had to lug all this equipment across on the chain ferry, which thank goodness was running that morning, onto the car ferry to come back. Then I had to find some poor little soul coming upstairs saying, would you like an IT lesson for an hour as we crossed the Solent? And luckily somebody did say yes. And I realised I made a terrible mistake not taking any headphones. I've got all this broadcasting equipment but no headphones. So I had to ask a lad who was playing on his PlayStation if I could just whip his headphones out and pop them in my laptop. And amazingly, it worked. But it was the backup. It was all the stuff that had to come. And at that point, you just couldn't trust the fact the laptop was going to work, but it did. But it was quite a hairy time. Probably the worst time.
You have to be so careful, and you have to have those backups. I can remember when I came out of the gym on a Sunday and I listened to the local commercial station one day, and I listened to their news bulletin, and it proudly announced, very sadly, the tragic death of George Harrison, the Beatle, which was really, really bad. It was particularly bad though because he died 3 months before then, and the news bulletin had been recorded and somehow got stuck in the system, and it was coming around every hour on the hour on this radio station announcing the death of George Harrison.
Oh my goodness.
There are times like that where things happen. You do get absolute horror stories, but having the backup and having the knowledge to actually know what to do, you really earn your money when things go wrong, I think, in radio.
Yes. And you're always waiting for the silence, Margaret. It's one of the worst things that can happen. Sorry, I spoke over you then. But the moment you can't hear anything, you're on sort of, what's gone wrong? Has everything collapsed? Can anybody hear? What has it all gone down? And actually, that was an important thing, Richard, that I hadn't thought of, is checking our sources, make sure our information is correct. And that is one of the trouble things that can be very, very hard. It's like Chinese whispers at times, trying to make sure highways agents, don't tell anybody, but highways agency aren't very good at updating their information. So they might have updated to say this motorway, which has caused chaos, will be closed for another couple of hours, and they'll have just done that update, when actually they've just also sent out a tweet, or the police have sent out a tweet saying, hey, the road's reopened. So just having everything at your fingertips, it's brilliant having it all online, but it takes a long time to check it.